So welcome. This session is one in the track of the Rehabilitation Engineering and Assistive Technology Society of North America. If you're not aware, there is a track that has RESNA presentations. And one of the reasons, and let me know if you can't hear me, I'll be standing nearby, but I don't have a voice that carries, I'm told. So one of the reasons we put this in the RESNA track and wanted to bring it to you is that RESNA is very active in assistive product standards development and is an accredited body to do that. So we wanted to talk to you guys today about product standards. And so I'm Patricia Karg, and I'm faculty at the University of Pittsburgh. My background is my training's in engineering, and I do research in the area of product evaluation. And that can be both laboratory benchtop evaluation as well as clinical evaluation of products. And I'm very active in the standards development. I chair the Assistive Technology Standards Board at RESNA, which oversees the development of assistive product standards. And I'm also active on the Wheelchair Seating Committee and the Wheelchair Motor Vehicle Transportation Committee. And I'll let my co-presenters present them.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Ben Jabrowski. I am officially the testing engineer at the Human Engineering Research Laboratories in Pittsburgh. I work for the Department of Veterans Affairs, and I'm also the vice chair of the Wheelchair Standards Committee and the chair of the working group for warnings and driver assistance systems, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on.
Hello, I'm Just Fought. I'm a research engineer for Lucy, and today I'm presenting on behalf of RESNA about the warning and driver assistance systems group, and I'm the vice chair. Just want to let you know that any of the products we show is not an endorsement of RESNA, not an endorsement of anything really. We're just using examples that we have access to, but want to be able to show those with you. Thank you.
Okay, so our purpose really, as I started to mention, is to explain to you what product standards are, how they're created, and how they're used. They greatly impact our industry, and hopefully you guys will, if you're not, will be aware of that by the end. We want to raise awareness of the wheelchair and wheelchair seating standards that are already published. And we're also going to talk about some new standards development, as been alluded to, in wheelchair warning and driver assistance systems. And our overall goal is really increase your understanding of what product standards are, what standards exist, what opportunities there are, and really to encourage your involvement in the process. So just starting with, what are we talking about when we're talking about product standards? Very dry when you read it, right? Test specifications describing procedures to measure product performance using quantifiable, reliable performance metrics. So they are documents that have test methods, test procedures that specify how to measure a product to get a certain performance metric. And there can be multiple measures within a standard that are looked at, and multiple sections of a standard. And in addition, they can also have design requirements as well as labeling requirements. So the goal really is that we want something that objectively measures the performance of products, so that allows for comparison of products. So this is an example of some of the areas where standards are used. Mainly our goal, right, is to ensure safe, reliable, and functional products. That's our primary goal. And the standards are voluntary. So it requires organizations to adopt them, to give them some teeth, to make individuals use them. So some of the benefits of them is that industry can use them as criteria against which to design products, as well as support marketing claims. Regulators such as the FDA can use them, and the FDA does actually reference the wheelchair standards. It also helps to improve cost effectiveness is some of the goals when these are being developed. And terminology, standardizing terminology, as you guys may be well aware, sometimes when you're talking throughout the industry, we don't all use the same terminology when we're describing products and features. And when you are a consumer of that product, the industry may be using in their marketing different terminology. So the standards also look towards standardizing that terminology so that we're all talking the same language. They can be used as criteria by purchasing organizations, and the VA does reference them. For reimbursement, so Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services uses the standards and will reference test procedures as part of their coding verification, as well as for position papers within our profession, best practices and clinical practice guidelines. The standards provide some reliable, objective information that can be referenced as part of those. And ultimately, they can be used for comparing and selecting products. And it's something that, as you go through the exhibit hall, you can think about, some of the features and some of the products you're looking at and ask the questions of, what testing, what clinical evidence or standardized testing has been done to support some of those features and performance characteristics that are being claimed. So what we also like to emphasize is what standards are not intended to do. So often people will test a bunch of products and say, well, now we've got these results and I'm just going to rank them and I'm going to go to the top of the list and that's where I'm going to start. And that's not the intention at all. Recognize that there is no one product that often meets all the needs of an individual. And it's something that these performance outcomes and standards outcomes are intended to be used as part of the process, along with clinical reasoning, patient preferences, best practices, and evidence. It's just a piece of information that can be used. And so I mentioned how some of the standards, they will test things and you'll have a continuum of results of that standard. So it's not always a pass-fail criteria associated with everything. So it could measure, an example, because I work in seating, the immersion capabilities of a cushion. And so you've got along the spectrum of how much cushions will immerse. So it's a decision of understanding. Immersion's an easier one to understand, but understanding what that metric is telling you. And if it's important to you as a consumer or to your client, and how important it is to look at that measure that comes out of that standard. So I want to talk a little bit about how standards are created, just so that you know that it isn't just a small group of people with an agenda creating and publishing a document that then drives all this. It's a very rigorous, standardized, probably the wrong way to use it, wrong word to use, process. But it starts with that it has to respond to a need in the market. So you need to have, it's brought to the table by stakeholders in the industry, or I shouldn't say industry, stakeholders in our arena. Could be industry, consumers, clinicians will say, we'd like to see some product standards in this area because we're concerned about safety, or we're concerned about quality, or we want more information on performance. We want something to help understand the claims that are being made with products. So often it helps with emerging technologies, which is an example of the new working group that we're going to talk about. So then once that need is presented, and the organizations that develop standards will need to approve that, then that standard will begin to be developed. Doesn't ensure it's going to be published, it just starts to be developed. So then you're putting together a group of stakeholders, and those committees or working groups need to represent all stakeholders. So we're talking, you want some clinicians, you want some regulators, you want consumers, you want researchers, you want industry, you want suppliers there, all at the table. And we try to have a balance of these different interest categories. It is required to have a balance of these categories. And so the individuals that are at the table are often experts in that area, in that product. And so the reason I have global there is because they are developed both internationally and nationally standards. So you will have global representation and expertise input on international standards. And then it's a consensus process. So in addition to then having this group of stakeholders developing the standards, you now need to have majority consensus. And there is a very systematic process that we go through with the standards to get that approval. And whoops, I missed one. And then just again, emphasizing that these are voluntary standards. So there is nothing requiring anybody to pick them up and use them unless individuals are asking for test results or organizations are adopting them in their regulation or purchasing procedures. So I alluded to that there is international and national development. So most countries have national standards bodies. In the US, the American National Standards Institute is one, and RESNA is accredited by ANSI to develop standards for assistive products. And then internationally, the International Organization for Standardization, ISO, is the organization that will develop standards for assistive products. And there needs to be harmonization and communication between these groups. We don't want standards that are disparate and making a bunch of different requirements, especially with the global market. So oftentimes, but not always, standards will start at the national level. It's easier to get consensus, it's easier to get approval and to do that work. Then those can be brought to the international arena. And if you have enough countries, member countries that are interested and will have intentions to adopt and use that standard, then ISO will also pick up that as a new item to work on. And then through that process, ISO, as they're adopting it and member countries are voting and there's consensus, will sometimes modify that standard. So then it kind of comes back to the national levels to say, well, do we want to adopt that ISO document, modify our own? So there is this back and forth. So you will see reference to national standards and international standards often in the same arena. And we are doing our best to harmonize that work, but there will be differences and those usually will be pointed out to you in the documents. So as far as RESNA, how that structure works in development, there's the Assistive Technology Standard Board that I mentioned that oversees, that is the ANSI accredited body. And the scope there on the slide, that activities scope is to develop and maintain assistive technology standards to maximize the health and independence of people with disabilities. It's a fairly broad scope, so it allows us to do a lot of different things and a lot of different products. So the responsibilities as this accredited developer, the first one is that we coordinate the development of these voluntary consensus standards for assistive products. And in addition, we also administer the U.S. Technical Advisory Group for ISO, which means that our membership and our committees also go to the international arena as experts if they choose and represent the U.S. position in the international arena. And so when we administer that US tag, every member country only gets one vote. So that means that that tag has to get kind of consensus within all our the committees of the relevant standards, and then put together one vote with comments to the international arena. So RESNA has 9 active standards committees with representation from over 150 organizations, and currently about 20 active standards. And those are related to wheelchairs and wheelchair seating, which will focus more on wheelchairs today. The wheelchair seating, wheelchair motor vehicle transportation, wheelchair air travel, which is one of our newer standards, as well as accessibility of fitness centers, adaptive sports equipment, cognitive accessibility of products, and emergency stair travel devices. So again, just kind of to emphasize how this is a more rigorous process. This is just laying out a little bit about what I talked about, but again, it's starting with a proposal from a stakeholder group that needs to be approved by the organization developing that standard. Within RESNA now is kind of where I'll focus, that we then have assistive technology standards committees that are the consensus body to develop that standard. So when a new proposal comes to the board, they will look to see if it could be done under an existing committee or if perhaps a new committee needs to be formed. And if it's an existing committee, great, because we already have that consensus body. If not, we need to create a new committee and we have to recruit all the various stakeholders. And each committee has to identify the interest categories of the stakeholder groups and then look to recruit into all those categories and maintain a balance. And these are open to anyone who's interested. There are in procedures a cap of about, I think, 36, maybe 38 now. We don't ever reach that. We don't have enough volunteers, but so we're always welcoming more and trying to get more balance. So that group will, hit the button too fast, will then work to develop that draft standard. And if that draft contains test methods, there will be validation testing in multiple laboratories to look for interlaboratory repeatability. Again, we're trying to get objective, reliable, repeatable measures. And then once it's shown that you can validate, that is a reliable, repeatable method, it goes through a consensus process. And that is going back to that consensus body where it goes out for balloting and voting. You need to get a majority to approve that standard. Through that process, there's often technical comments. And anytime there's technical comments, that group has to go back and address those technical comments and revise the standard and put it back out for balloting. And once you get to the end of that cycle where you don't have a lot of technical comments or they're minimum and you have consensus by majority, then you can publish that standard. And as you can see, can be a fairly long process. It takes years sometimes to develop those standards. I see some of my colleagues in the back smiling who have done this for 20 years. So I'd mentioned that international piece and the need to harmonize. So always keeping in mind and keeping active at the international level so that we can harmonize those standards and be aware of the developments that are occurring at the international level. So benefits for being part of this process really is that you have a voice in shaping the evolution of these product standards. We want them to be relevant. We want them to measure things that are meaningful, interesting, useful. And so that's where we need everybody at the table to kind of balance those things. We also don't want them necessarily to cause harm. We don't want them to prevent new products from coming online because the design requirements are restrictive. So that's where we need, designers and developers at the table. So when you're part of this process, in addition to having that voice and being able to vote and contribute to development, you also have access to the RESNA standards and ISO standards in the area that you're working, the draft standards. You have involvement with other experts, fellow experts in your area, that marketplace involvement and networking opportunities. There's virtual opportunities to join the working group so that not everybody has to be there in person. And through the platforms, both ISO and RESNA, there's platforms that connect everybody where you share documents and discussions and a collaborative environment. So I'll end with just showing you what standards we have developed and published related to wheelchairs. So there is volume 1 and 2, which Ben is going to go into some more detail about for wheelchairs. Volume 3 is wheelchair seating, and that has body and seat measures. It has cushion performance characteristics related to tissue integrity management and stability, as well as postural support devices, strength and durability of them. Flammability as well is included in that. And volume 4, which is wheelchairs and transportation, that's motor vehicle transportation, that's specifying securement systems for wheelchairs, as well as the wheelchairs themselves being a seat in a motor vehicle, so the crashworthiness requirements of that wheelchair and labeling requirements, as well as knowing that there's aftermarket seating often placed on wheelchairs. There's also a section addressing the crashworthiness of wheelchair seating. And one of the newest ones that we're pretty excited about that Peter Axelson is leading up is the assistive technology for air travel. And their first focus has to do with requirements and test methods related to mobility devices. And they've published the first section that's up there, labeling and design requirements for mobility devices designed for storage and transport in commercial aircraft. And the goal there obviously is to try to prevent the damage that's occurring when air carriers are handling mobility devices. And they're now working on a section for procedures for handling the devices. So I'll leave you with this, which is just an interesting aspect that kind of tells you a little bit about the diversity of what standards could do. That section 4 has specifications for this air travel configuration card, that the idea is that the manufacturer will provide this card that can then be customized by the user. So it has specifications about the wheelchair, about where to lift to not damage the wheelchair, where to secure the wheelchair, how to disengage the drive system, the battery, the overall weight of it, and then a link to the manual so that air carriers have information to properly prepare and stow the wheelchair without causing damage. And the idea is that the individual will take this card, fill it out, and provide it when they're traveling. So now I'm going to hand it over to Ben. And we'll do questions at the end.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. So like I said, my name is Ben Jabrowski. So I am the chairperson of the RESNA Wheelchair Committee. I'm vice chair of the RESNA Wheelchair Committee, and we work primarily with WC1 and WC2. They are the two, I guess, two different sections of that committee. And WC1, essentially what it is it is the basic wheelchair standard for all wheelchairs, manual, electrically powered, scooters included in that. So it's a bunch of basic low-level standards. There's some kind of standards to set up testing areas as well, and some vocabulary, things like that. Basically, it encompasses everything in that realm there. WC2 is more specific. It is intended for electrically powered wheelchairs and scooters. It goes into a little bit more details. But the basic thing, the basic takeaway from these two sections is that they can be boiled down into about three different sections. You have documentation, labeling, and dimensions and maneuverability, kind of all into one. And then you have stability testing and durability testing. And as the testing engineer at our research lab, I do the durability and stability testing primarily, and then also the maneuverability stuff for kind of reporting on the test reports. So specifically, this is volume 1 of WC1. It's this giant wall of text. But as you can see here, there's things like braking tests, stability, and those are, well, stability is the stability testing. That's static stability is essentially setting a chair on a surface and tipping it until it tilting it until it tips over. And we just kind of want to see if everything else stays the same when a chair is going to tip over. It's really not good as it's the best way it's used is in comparison to other devices of a similar type. And that's generally what we intend to do. Things like section 5 and section 7, those are dimensions and maneuverability. We're measuring how a chair can maneuver in a given space, what kind of door opening it can go through, what the turning radius is of it, depending on the configuration, or if, it's a scooter, how small of a 3-point turn it can make between two walls, for example. Whereas section 7, we're measuring the seating system and the adjustability of the seating system. So, how many adjustment points does it have for like a manual chair, or for a power chair? What's the range of motion if it has a power seating function? Let's see. So, and then we go into section 8. That's the big one. That's our big durability test. What we're doing is we're seeing essentially what parts are going to break on it. We push on armrests, for example, to see if somebody uses the armrest to transfer themselves in and out, is it going to fail? We do things like if you run into a wall, is a caster going to get damaged, or a hand rim for a manual chair? And then we do the two big tests are the double drum or multi-drum test and the curb drop test. The multi-drum test essentially have two big rollers, and there's 1/2 inch tall slats on it, and it rotates at 1 meter per second surface speed. And we put the chair, the scooter on that, run it for 200,000 revolutions of those drums, which is about 50 hours worth of testing. And we want to see if parts fall off, if wheels get destroyed. You're allowed to replace a inner tube once in the 100 or the 200,000 cycles if something were to fail, if you get a hole in an inner tube or whatever. And after that, we take it to the curb drop test, which is a 2-inch drop test where we lift the device up 2 inches and drop it about 6,000 times. What we're looking for there are things like, is the seating system going to fail? If you're going over bumps or going off of curbs repeatedly, how is your chair going to survive? The intent there is about 3 to 5 years of real world usage, and it's an accelerated wear test, of course. And the curb drop test takes about 6 hours to complete with our testing equipment, but other test labs, it can take longer. Okay, so as you can see here too, there's also things like section 11, section 13, and 22 and 26. Those are kind of the setup procedure tests. They give us the vocabulary for all of the sections, and for section 26. Section 13, we're actually testing all the surfaces we test on to see what kind of friction coefficient they have. It's just a basic test. You kind of do it once whenever you set up your test lab area, and hopefully you don't have to do it too many times just to verify pretty much. And then section 11, all the test mannequins, test dummies that we use, that's how we set them up, according to that standard. So moving on. So for the volume 2 stuff, for the electrically powered chairs, we do a stability test for that as well. Section 2 is dynamic stability, because power chairs typically can move under their own power. We want to see how stable they are during doing certain obstacles. Things like going down a slope backwards and stopping or trying to go forward. Is the front end of the chair going to come up? Or if you go down a slope and stop really quickly, are you going to tip forward? Things like that. I've seen and know people that have had accidents in those ways. So it's really important, I think, to test that and see what the limits of devices are. Let's see. The other one, section 4, there's just the range. We get an estimated comparable range to other devices. I don't think it really compares super well to the real world, but it gives us a basis for comparison of devices. And then section 6 is maximum speed and acceleration. Again, those things can kind of be set by the manufacturer, so it's not super comparable, I don't think. Section 9 is important. That's the climatic test. So we do things like hot tests, cold tests. If a chair sits in a cold area, or if it's in a container ship when it's getting shipped to its destination, is it still going to function when it gets there? Or if we have a rain nozzle where we actually hit the device with a bunch of water and see if it still functions. And turns out sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So, right. But the biggest test out of all this is section 14. We're doing power and control systems. So things like the electronics, we do certain things like if somebody wires their batteries up backwards, is it going to cause a failure? You know, is it, how does the device perform as the batteries drain? Does it do anything weird? Does it kind of veer, or does one of the motors shut down or something, for example? So we're kind of trying our best to cover all the bases. And with all of these things, you know, we also do batteries and their chargers. We also have, not here, but in ISO, we're starting to work with lithium batteries specifically because they have their own limitations, their own kind of things that we need to be concerned with, mainly catching fire if they're not handled properly, which is of course a big problem, but it's even bigger if you can't get out of your wheelchair, for example, if it was on fire. So, and there's some people where that is the case, of course. Right. So basically every one of those standards I've talked about started its life as a proposal and as a working group. Some of them kind of came all as once, you know, as a group, but what we do is we take a proposal of a standard or standards, and if the committee agrees that it's something that needs to be pursued, we create a working group. And that's where the one that Joe's going to talk about, that we're both the chair and vice chair on, is right now. So basically what we're doing is we're essentially trying to develop a draft standard for one of the proposal. Oops, I guess I hit that. Oh boy. Give me 1 second here. Well, that's terrible. There we go. Okay, great. So what we're doing right now is we are actually in the brainstorming session. We're just creating a bunch of notes. We're kind of distilling it down into a standard. And once we get that to a point, we're going to create the draft standard. We're going to send it back to the committee where they're going to vote on it. They're going to give us comments, and then we're going to get back to it. We're going to address the comments. We're going to go in this iterative process for however many cycles it takes until we get to something where we send it up to the main working group. Okay, now I feel less bad. I think it's that thing. Okay, don't step on the tape, guys. But when we get to that point, then we'll send it up to the main RESNA group, and if it gets approved by them, then it will become a standard eventually. And that's kind of what the end goal is. But like I say, this leads us into the current working group that we're working on. So this was initially proposed by Gene Minkle and Lucy, and they have a proposal, which you can see the front page of it right there. Essentially what they did is they demonstrated the clinical need that this type of technology has essentially no regulation right now, and creating some sort of guidelines in standard form we think is the best path forward. So our working group right now consists of Lucy members. There's members of other groups that are creating their own similar type of warning and driver assistance systems. I'm going to let Joe go into more detail with that. And but yeah, so that's where we're at right now, essentially. So Joe, I'll hand it off to you. Oops.
Did anyone catch the pre-con yesterday from Gene Minkle and Michelle Lang? Catch the title of it? Sensors on wheelchairs. If you can do a 4-hour pre-con on sensors, that means they're pretty prevalent in the field, right? And this is just, that's how technology is going. They're everywhere in our phones and our technology. And it seems like the industry is finally catching on to that. I didn't step on the cable. stand over here. So this is just going to keep accelerating and continuing, right? I understand that I work for a manufacturer that probably puts the most sensors on any given device. So. Okay, is it here? Where's the sweet spot?
At this point,
You know?
I don't think it's.
Okay, I'll just keep going. They're used for a variety of things, right? Tracking systems, there's gyroscopes in a lot of the chairs now, especially those front wheel drives that are hard to keep them in the line. Latch mode, I mean, that's an inherent one, right? It's kind of in the software, but I mean, is that a driver assistance? Does it classify as that? I mean, it's helping, right? A lot for the sip and puff drivers, all controls, things like that. Any of the add-on accessories, we start modifying our input signals, right? It could come from a head array, it could come from iDrives, whatever they are. So I just put an example of an IMU up here, right? We use those for tilt warnings, use them to see how fast something's going. There's tons of examples we can use in this. But the point is that it's just going to keep continuing. And there's, as Ben mentioned, products on the market already. And you're going to go, well, Joe, why would you want regulation for something, right? Currently, there is none. And it's Lucy believes that, hey, this is going to happen regardless at some point. So you might as well help assist it. We probably have a lot of the background on the testing and the relevant standards that apply. So we're like, we'd rather be involved in the process and help move it forward. And then if there's a new testing requirement that comes out of it, we can just add it into our testing portfolio. We're doing testing anyway. But it's to push the field forward and keep it advancing. And so that as other emerging technologies come out, we can just say, oh, here's the basis, here's the standard, the minimum requirements it should meet, common terminology use, and help unite the industry on that front. So we mentioned Ability Drive, Tilt Technologies, right? That's going to modify that input signal, send it through something. So you got to be careful of, is it doing what it's supposed to be doing? What is the testing behind it? Is it meeting electronic relevant standards? Stuff like that. If you're in the exhibit hall, if you ever heard Kendra Betts talk, she's always like, ask about their test reports, ask if they're meeting standards, right? You want to know what these technologies can do, their limitations, their benefits, the appropriate patient population, all of that. iBot, another good one. What, 4 or 5 gyros counted in that for its stability, something like that. I think I heard them saying, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a handful of gyros. So does it count as a warning or a driver assistance? Maybe not, but it's definitely sensor tech that's embedded into wheelchairs, and we'll see where it goes. And the reason I bring this up is not necessarily because they're warning driver assistance systems. It's that we have this evolving, and the working groups thus far has identified that, hey, there's gaps in our standards. A lot of it relates to the sensors and the electronics or mounting to chairs. And there's a lot of points that have been brought up that may not be in our scope right now, but things to look at moving forward. When we talk about warning and driver specific, backup cameras with sensors, right? That's going to provide a warning, say, hey, you're getting close to something, or a visual picture to say, hey, this is what's behind you, right? And there's a spectrum here. It's probably a low cost, very simple system. I think it's like a couple $100 versus what we do at Lucy, right? It's a full sensor suite, thousands of dollars. There's a lot going on there. It's providing an actual intervention too. Right? We are stopping that drive forward, which puts that in a different category. They all fall under the same umbrella, but how do we define what those are respectively? How do we make sure that we don't make that backup camera have to do something that the safety system would do, right? Because they're different products that have different functions. And so you have to be very careful about that when you're developing these standards. Okay. So once again, examples from Lucy. Sorry, I have access to them, but one of our judging smarts, we can look at where the spectrum is of smart technology in the industry currently. We have wearables, we have body track, smart check, different wheelchairs, Braze as a warning system, And then Spinal Smart Robotics, I don't know if you're familiar with, that's kind of like a line following kind of deal. Lucy, with partial automation and what we're doing with our ramp assist. So we're doing engaged autonomous driving, right? So that's not really done elsewhere. But it's coming, right? People are just going to keep advancing and keep going and keep pushing. So we want to be able to have references, and we're also not going to recreate the whole standard if a standard exists on something. You know, we don't need to go into IEC standards because they exist. We just say, hey, it should be compliant with this as well. Same with the add-on products. When you talk about the durability testing or the wetness testing, it's IP54 rated for wheelchairs for the most part. So shouldn't your add-on products meet the same standard, right? You don't want it to be an electrical hazard if it gets wet. And this is an important point to bring up. All these devices are FDA, either exemptions, but class 1, class 2, however may be, that pretty much that whole exhibit hall, right? So the FDA though can say it has to meet a certain standard, but it's not an enforcement agency. It's they present the evidence that the device is reasonably safe and effective for a particular use. That's their role. They're saying this is a safe consumer product for an intended function. But what they don't do, they don't conduct or provide a rating system on medical devices. They can't say it's not like the crash testing, right? It's not National Highway Transportation Safety Administration. You get 4 stars, you get 5 stars for crash testing. It's not like that. There is none of that in this industry that I'm aware of. However, if you require or request test results from manufacturers or independent test labs, if they've done that work, and say, I can compare X, Y, and Z of the same type of model across it, you can make informed decisions as clinicians, as users, as suppliers on how safe that product is for your intended environment of use or your function of use. So the point of standards is to get you the information you need to make those decisions. All right. So I already went into that. Sorry, should have advanced the slide a little sooner, but it's that comparing and contrasting. And the smart technologies, we have increased connectivity. So we're going to have things like data privacy concerns. We're going to have HIPAA concerns if it's medical use. There's a whole lot of questions and concerns that get brought up as soon as something's connected to the internet where you have remote access to it. So it's the responsibility of the manufacturers to clearly define that, but it's also the responsibility of the consumers, suppliers, and clinicians, and everyone else involved in the process to understand what the risks are and make sure that everyone's educated appropriately. So, new class of device. We're in a new era with those warning and driver's assistance systems specifically. So, but we're going to use the examples from the automotive industry, because guess what those cars have, right? Those cars have lane keep assist, they have automatic braking, things like that. It's not that the technology doesn't exist, it just is slowly coming into this industry. But if it already exists, the automotive industry is very heavily regulated. They have a lot more standards than us. So we can pull from that, and that makes our lives easier. So one example, lane departure warning system, SAE standard, Juliet 2808. So as we get through this drafting of the document, luckily, thanks to Doug, probably in particular, we were able to get for the working group access to this standard. So we could review it, we could pull relevant information, relevant terminology. That's a big one. We have a huge debate on what do you call something, right? And when we define this standard, it's going to be setting that bar. So we really got to make sure that it's appropriate terminology and can carry for time, essentially. But we'll go into the standard and we'll say, hey, that's relevant. That's a good term to call that. This is how they do their testing. So we can reference that, we can pull that in. And that's the nice thing about the national and international bodies is we can work together on those and not reinvent something that already exists. All right, so I done this earlier with safety and privacy, especially with connected devices. You know, different warning and driver's assistance systems have apps, right? So that means they have some form of connectivity, whether it be cell, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, whether it be for setup, whether that be for remote access or maintenance or user information, statistics. So when you're in the exhibit hall, you want to ask, okay, do they have a safety report? This boils down how we do all our testing, right? Tells you generally the results by model, how the product performs, so you're aware. It's information to consumers, clinicians, users, suppliers. And then we also talk about how we keep that data secure, how we make sure that the user information isn't going anywhere. And just once again, examples from Lucy, but ways to ask these questions or ways to have these conversations as this field progresses. And I'm sure that standard will cover at some point our connectivity and data safety. If we don't do it specifically, we'll reference the appropriate standards that may already exist from cell phone technologies or, you know, whatever it may be. So that's how Resna comes in. We have the standards committee on wheelchairs, and then we sent the proposal that Ben talked about. Lucy and Jean got that all together and said, hey, we want to do this. Got through Resna Connect, got everyone up there, and we started the warning and driver assistance working group. So our goal is the standard proposal that applies to wheelchairs and accessories, provide driver assistance awareness, safety features using sensors and software. Now, once again, that's a proposed goal. As we go through this iterative process that Ben talked about, it'll change. It's absolutely going to change. The scope will change, the terminology will change, the test requirements, but we had to start somewhere. Important things, terminology. That is going to be huge. It's going to be a huge topic of debate in the group, I'm sure. Everyone has differing opinions. Common framework for comparing those devices are minimum requirements for data disclosure. Limitations of the devices are going to be important. You have to know if that device is intervening or not is a huge one for us in that working group. It's a very big distinction of whether you're changing a control, changing an input, stopping the wheelchair, accelerating the wheelchair, any sort of autonomy. There's big distinctions there. And then test methods and how to report them. So is this a pass-fail criteria? Is there a quantifiable number we have to put? Is there qualitative information that goes along with this? Don't know yet. We'll find out. That's why it's a working group. We're still working. So that process is, we're going to try and set the scope. I think we've got a good draft of, you know, things we try and want to include. We've been meeting for what, 7 months maybe or so. So, you know, there's a learning curve. There's getting everyone spun up. We have a pretty diverse crew. So we've had members from the FDA, members from different manufacturers, whether that be add-on devices or actual full manufacturers of wheelchairs. We've had users and consumers in that group. Had I don't know if you have any suppliers, manufacturers of different control systems, and the operating system on the chair have also been involved. So there's a lot of voices and input, which we appreciate, because it's any kind of standard could affect any one of those stakeholders. Once again, the terminology, and it'll be a battle. We'll get there. And then it's going to get fun when we talk about testing. Testing is always really fun debate. So what does this product need to do? How do we show the difference between different products? How do we show the capabilities and the limitations? And eventually we'll form that draft of the standard and get it up. So one thing that has already been debated is, how do you define automation levels, right? They're different. They vary. This is how the automotive industry does it. So we'll see. But all right. This is also an informational session, but it's a call to action. It's, we listened to Andrea Van Hook this morning at the opening and talking about Resna, and she mentioned position papers along with these educational pieces. And it's all volunteer basis. I was just on one of the rewrites of the position paper that took us 2 years, start to finish, from full literature, review it, get the update going, then it goes out for review, and then it took long enough. We did a re-review of the literature, see if there's anything else that came out, right? It's a process, but it's all volunteers, and without volunteers, this isn't possible. So we really want to invite anyone that's interested to join this specific working group or other working groups and say, hey, if you're passionate about this, and you want to be involved, you want to have a voice in this, please join. Requirements are, you have to be a resident member to do it. No, 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 you can just volunteer.
Any interest groups, any individuals, we welcome all interest groups. You're not need to be a resident member. It's totally separate from resident membership.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. My apologies. I misspoke. I mean, I hope you're interested. That's unofficial requirement, strong passion for the industry and its future, because we can't do this without many people's inputs, but it doesn't matter your role in the industry. It doesn't matter. Anyone's welcome. You're all stakeholders in the end result of this. So please come join. All right. And this is where we want to hear from you. Are there other things that we should be looking at? I know, for example, something I've brought up is the CAN bus systems on wheelchairs and what that looks like, and input methods and how all drives connect to them. You know, are there other standards that resident needs to be aware of that we should be looking at? So anyone have strong opinions, options?
There is currently going on at ISO level work on the standard in this area that's due to have its first draft out this year, and that's covering automatic navigation, obstacle detection, detection response to uneven surfaces, covering speed, rate of deceleration, and so forth. So other safety elements are coming out in that standard that's been extended from the already published in 2014 as the robotic device standard, and they've extended that towards autonomous wheelchairs. So there's a standard already in process. So I haven't seen the detail of your proposal, but there looks to be a lot of overlap, and it'd be a shame if we ended up with two different groups working in parallel, trying to produce the same kind of outcome.
Gotcha. Okay, so yeah, that's a great point. So depending on the timing of that, if that comes out before we have a draft done or what have you, you know, we can integrate a lot of that or reference it in some capacity. Do you know the number on that one?
It hasn't been allocated a number yet.
Okay. Yeah, so something that we'll have to keep being aware of as the working group continues, for sure.
Yeah, it must be rather new work. I know as far as like even in the last ISO committee conference, it wasn't anything there. So they just extended it. Is that right?
It was presented at the Berlin TC 173 meeting.
Okay.
What if that's 44, 48? Is that one?
Maybe.
Could be that one. We're aware of 44, 48 that's coming. I know that one's in work. It has something to do with robotic wheelchairs as well. So there's definitely standards in the robotic industry as well, that one of our group members has been pulling information from as far as terminology and such, because that could apply as well, depending on the automation level of the device.
ISO 21856 is very important there for safety elements right down the line.
Absolutely. Anything else people are aware of or things to look out for, or?
Could I ask a question?
Yeah,
Of
course.
from the earlier presentation from Tricia? The work that Peter's been doing on the transportation side of things has been invaluable, but because air transportation tends to get out of the US, having something that works well for US citizens sitting on a plane at an airport in the US and then ending up in Europe, and the same not happening coming back is a challenge. So I would have thought that is one of your excellent pieces of work that's been done in the States that should be internationalized as soon as possible. Having said that, I know that IATA have published a standard in the last couple of months that actually is incorporating the US work in there, but that's an IATA one, not an ISO standard.
Right. I think you're referring to the International Air Travel Association.
Yeah.
You say that right. They reference that section, yes. But you're saying just sooner than later, you'd like to see it brought to the international arena?
Well,
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely.
We have other questions? We can do questions. Yeah, we got, what, about 9 or so minutes left? Macy, any other questions? If you have interest or want to know more about it, we go resna.org, AT standards. You can find information about the committees, what they're doing, what they're working on, and that's how you can get connected to the working group. If you need, if not, I have business cards. You could email one of us. We can get you connected to the right people to get involved.
And you don't have to be afraid of just exploring it. You can observe and come to meetings and just kind of see what it's all about before committing to anything. So don't be scared.